to give it a few more minutes to let some more people trickle in. In the meantime, I want to make a couple of announcements. This is going to be, well, first of all, just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the Voyager 3D workshop. So this will be a hands-on, for the most part, walkthrough of the Voyager 3D platform that we've created and maintained at the Smithsonian to create and display interactive experiences on the web centered around 3D models. So that's what we'll be talking about today. If you don't want to actively participate in the workshop, that's okay. But we just want you to know that that's how it's been designed. And towards that end, if you check out that red box at the bottom of the slide, if you have not done this yet, if you could sign up for a free account at glitch.com. That's just a convenient way for us to support walking you through embedding content on a web page. If you have your own way to do that, if you're a web developer, feel free to ignore that. But for everyone who wants to follow along, if you could also please download the workshop resources at the link that's on the slide there. And I believe John will also drop that link into the chat. All right. I'm going to give my pitch one more time and then we'll get started. So for anyone who just arrived, this is the Voyager 3D workshop. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a mostly hands-on walkthrough of our Voyager 3D platform, which is something that we've developed internally at the Smithsonian and continue to support. So we'll walk through using that system to craft and also display interactive experiences centered around 3D models on the web. And this will be hands-on, but if you don't want to participate, that's fine. We won't kick you out, but you will get the most out of it if you do. And if you're planning to participate, in the red box at the bottom, if you have not done so already, please do a couple of things. Sign up for a free account at glitch.com. And that's just a place that makes it easy for us to walk you through embedding content in a web page. And also download the workshop resources, which it's a Dropbox link. There will be a zip file with 3 resources in it. And you'll definitely need those if you want to walk through our crafting a scene experience. And those either are already in the chat or will be added right now. All right, so let's get started. So I am Jamie Cope. I'm the lead developer on the 3D team at the Digitization Program Office. And I also have my colleague John Blundell here. He'll be in the chat answering any questions and hopefully resolving any issues you may have as we walk through these different steps. And he is a program officer on our team. And just as a reminder, this workshop is being recorded. All right, so to start out, for those folks on the workshop that are from outside of the Smithsonian, we just wanted to give you a little bit of context on what we're doing here. So to start with, the Smithsonian as a whole has a goal for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And so if we drill down a little bit in our hierarchy to the Digitization Program Office, we want to support that by increasing the quantity, quality, and throughput of our collections digitization. So then we have more knowledge that we can put out there in more accessible ways. And to go one step further down, the 3D team at the Digitization Program Office supports this through 3D digitization. And hopefully some of you were at a previous workshop where we talked about how that works. So just as an overview, we 3D scan, as we talked about in that last workshop. Then we process the data that we get from those scans into high resolution mesh models. Then we take those super high resolution models, sometimes, tens of millions of triangles or even higher, and we crunch those down into usable models for delivery purposes like 3D printing or for the web. And then lastly, what we'll focus on today is we deliver those 3D models online. But we don't want to just take those models, put them up online in a vacuum. We want to provide some context to those models. We want people to have a learning experience when they interact with those models rather than just seeing that object, rotating it, zooming it. So that's where Voyager comes in. So our Voyager tool suite is mainly two things. It has a front-end component and a back-end component. The front-end component is what you'll see in a few moments. It's on our website. So that's what displays these experiences to the public. And then our back-end component that we call Voyager Story, that's what we use to craft those experiences. And so why Voyager? There's a lot, if you look into it, there are a lot of options for displaying 3D models on the web. But when we evaluated all these options, there were some things that were lacking that we felt like we could address with Voyager. Number one, our solution is focused from an educational standpoint on the needs of cultural heritage. Also, I think one of the most important points is it's open source. So anything we do is freely available. We have a repository on GitHub. You can use the software as is. You can, remix it. You can fork it, make your own version. We just want to, foster an environment for creating a better, use case for everyone in cultural heritage. And lastly, we see it as durable. So many of you, may know that some of these technical solutions, you get a really nice experience and it may last for a year, maybe 2 years if you're lucky. And then the technology gets deprecated or, things sort of move on. And all the time you put into, those experiences is lost and you kind of have to develop for whatever the new flavor is. And how we've designed Voyager is we've based it on what we call a scene descriptor file. And so that scene descriptor file packs in all of the information that we need for our experience in sort of an easily accessible and durable way, so that in the future, when our Voyager front end, Voyager Explorer maybe is out of date, is no longer the solution we want to use, we will have all the content we need to recreate our experiences in a new technology available. Like we can just port it from Voyager to whatever the next generation is. And with that in mind, we're going to head into the workshop portion, and we're going to take a quick overview of what that Voyager front end, Voyager Explorer looks like. So to do that, I'm going to switch my tab over to a live view of our webpage, which is 3d.si.edu. So if you want to follow along, you can go to that URL. You can click our Explore tab at the top of the page, and you can find any object there that you're interested in. Here I'm displaying the Charlie Parker saxophone, which will be familiar to you if you saw the previous workshop, that was digitized by Joseph, who I believe is also in the workshop with us now. And if you want to go directly to this model, I think John will also drop a link to this in the chat as well. So we'll start out by just showing off the basic, 3D browser functionality. So I can rotate the model, I can zoom in and out, I can pan around, pretty standard. But then in the upper left-hand corner of this box, so this dark blue box, this is the Voyager component that's embedded in the web page. In this left-hand corner, we have our feature menu. So at the top, we'll start with our interactive tours. So interactive tours are ways for a content matter expert to curate an experience around an object, to guide an end user through, learning about aspects of that item. And so this item has one tour, so we'll start that up. And you can see it starts out by displaying an article about this object, so you can get long form text, read more about it before you get started. So if we go to the next step in the tour, we'll see that now we get a nice full view of the saxophone. If we continue on, we zoom in to get some more detailed information, which is then followed by a more detailed view. And so on. So information about the key clusters, then we have a nice view of the key clusters along with an open annotation. So that gives you an idea of how tours work. They essentially guide you around the object and allow that content matter expert to decide what the user will see at a certain point in time. So I'll exit out of the tours. I'll go to the next button, which is our article menu. So in this case, we already have an article open, but I can go back to the menu and you'll see that we have a whole list of that additional long form content. So you could just choose, an article that is something you're interested in if you wanted to go directly there to read more about that object. Then we have our annotations. So we can turn those on and off whenever we want from that menu. And so these annotations describe really specific points on an object surface. So if I zoom in, you can see that there's a lead line at the end of these that's pointing to certain spots. We have different types of annotations, which we'll talk about later. But this type here, if you click on the annotation, it expands and it provides a box where you can have more detailed content about that annotation. In the case of this object, the curator decided instead of distilling all their content down into something that would fit in this box, they linked this annotation to one of those articles that we talked about earlier. So instead of extra text here, you're getting a link, which if you click on it, will take you to one of those articles. But you can put text directly into this box if it's succinct. We recommend that it's not more than 1 or 2 sentences. Otherwise, you can imagine this box gets really big, and then as you rotate, it can occlude the object. And our main goal here is to provide, a nice view of this object. And so the next button is our share button. So that gives you some pretty common, social media sharing options. So if you want to share this experience on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, we also have a button to craft an email to share. Then at the bottom here is what we call the embed link. And so this is code that you can copy and paste to take this exact experience with the Charlie Parker saxophone and embed it in your own web page. And that's exactly what we're going to walk through in just a few moments. All right, and so the next button we have is full screen. So full screen is pretty self-explanatory, just takes that Voyager box on the page and expands it out to full screen. And then lastly, we have our sort of advanced features and settings. And so that's got quite a bit in it. So it opens up another button at the bottom of the window. And the options we have here, the first category is view. So that's a way to just get certain like profile views of the object, like front, back, left, right. And then we also have a center button. So if you're, navigating all around and you're really getting into it and you sort of lose your place and the object might be, like off in space somewhere, you can just click that center button to bring it right back to the middle. Next, we have material. So material is a way of changing the surface color properties of the object. So the first option we have is clay. And the reason we might want to use this is if we have an object that has some really interesting surface features. Like if I zoom in, I see some pretty subtle changes in geometry here near the bell of the saxophone. But imagine that the actual coloring or the pattern on the saxophone was such that it was really hard to see that. It obscured that change in geometry. The clay material really gives us a nice clean look. So it takes away any designs or patterns that might be on there, so we can get a much cleaner look at the geometry. Then we have X-ray. So X-ray gives you, of course, a look inside the object. So that's pretty cool if you have something with interesting internal geometry that's hard to see from the outside. Then we have normals. This is a pretty technical view, but essentially what this is it's coloring the object based on the direction that the triangles making up that surface are pointing, which leads us to the last one, which is wireframe. So if I zoom in here, the wireframe actually shows us all of the thousands of little triangles that make up this object. So that can really give you an appreciation for the complexity of these objects. All right, so our next section is environment. So environment has some different options. Say you want to change the background color to make the object pop a little bit more, you can do that. We have a grid and a floor that can be turned on to give a little more context to the object. And then this last piece is environment maps. And so environment maps are particularly important for things like the saxophone, which is shiny. So for objects to reflect light, they need something to reflect. So they can't, again, exist in a vacuum. So that means they need an environment around them. So that's where the environment map comes in. So we have essentially an image that's simulating the environment that would be around the object. Right now, we have one that Joseph created, which essentially simulates his capture environment. So it's mostly white. But if I change this map to a different option, you'll see a pretty significant change. So you'll notice on the bell of the saxophone, we've got a much greener tint now that I changed that environment map. And that's because this map option is actually an outdoor scene. So we have trees and a sky and things like that that are reflecting off of this object. So that gives us a pretty significantly different look. Then we have lights. So you can change the intensity and the color of any of the lights in the scene. And we also have a measurement tool. So for the measurement tool, you can turn it on, and then you can click on any 2 points on the object, and it'll drop 2 little pins in there, and then it'll give you a real world measurement between those 2 pins. And then lastly, we have our slice tool. So for our slice tool, you can pick an axis. I'll go with Z, then turn the tool on. And what it does is it slices right through that object on that axis. And then you can take this position slider and you can scrub through. So this is another feature that can be useful if you have an object with, some sort of interesting internal geometry. This can give you a better view of it. All right, so now we will head right into the first hands-on portion of the workshop, which is going to be embedding one of these Smithsonian experiences into a web page. So to do that, the first thing we want to do is we're going to go to glitch.com. So hopefully most of you that want to follow along have already created an account. If you haven't, it's pretty easy, doesn't take much time. But for those of you that have, you should be seeing some sort of page like this. It might be slightly different. But in the top right hand corner, you should see a button that says New Project. So you want to click New Project and then click the first option, which says Glitch Hello Website. So by clicking this, the Glitch website is going to create a starter web page for you. And it will take a few seconds, but it should eventually pop right up. So there we go. So here on the right hand side, it's showing us a preview of this page. If you don't have that window on yours, you can click the preview button at the bottom and you can open a preview pane or you can preview in a new window. So now what we'll do is over on the left-hand side, it shows you all the files that it's created for your web page. And we're going to click on index.html. So that's our main web page file. All right, and so next what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our 3D website. Uh, Actually, I'm going to go back to the saxophone tab so we can go back to the main page, 3d.si.edu. And we're going to click on the Explore tab again. And for this demo, we're going to work with the Space Shuttle. So we'll click on that Space Shuttle thumbnail. The Space Shuttle will load up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to click on that share button that we just talked about. So we're going to open that share window. And now we have this embed code here. So what you can do is you can highlight it and copy and paste however you want to do it. There's also a button to the right that you can click. It will copy it directly to your clipboard. Then we will go back to our glitch page. And even though there's a lot of stuff here on this page, you can ignore most of it. This is just, the stuff they put in to create this page here on the right. What we're going to look for is the comment in here that says, this is the body of the page. We're going to go underneath that gray block, hit enter a couple of times to make some space. And then we're just going to paste that code we just copied right in there. And now you'll see in my preview window on the right, I've got our experience, our Space Shuttle experience embedded right into my web page. And again, if you don't have this panel on the right, just click preview at the bottom of your window and select either of those options for previewing your page. And so it's as easy as that. Essentially, you just take that code from the share window on any of the Smithsonian experiences, copy that code, and then paste it directly into your web page. No other work necessary. Unless, like in this case, if you wanted this window to be centered or you wanted it to be a different size or have other styling, that's something you'd have to add yourself within your web page. All right, now I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions or anything that I need to go back over with embedding an experience in the web page.
Nothing's cropped up in chat. So yeah, no questions so far.
All right, great. Sounds good. All right, so we will move on to the meat of the workshop now, which is going to be crafting your own Voyager experience. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to the web page that has our Voyager Story application. And before we do that, I want to, yeah.
We do have, this is a general question, but can you use Voyager and choose not to allow it to be embeddable?
Yeah, technically you could. You certainly can. We have configuration options for the Voyager component. So certainly you could make it much less easy for someone. You could remove that share button altogether. You can actually remove all of the buttons, the menu, if that's not something that you're interested in using on your page. That's something that you can customize. The content itself, if you're internal to the Smithsonian and you have a application or you have a model that you want to host, but you don't want people to be able to use that, that's a discussion that we would need to have. You could contact us on the 3D team and we could talk about how we can handle that. Just in general, the difficult thing is if you look in the code here, I'll highlight it. I'm not sure how well you can see this font size, but in order to use the component, you essentially have to give it a location of your content. So if someone were to someone more advanced were to sort of dig into the code of your web page, there's always the opportunity that they could grab that content. But generally speaking, we can certainly make it much harder for someone to just drop it into their own web page from yours, for sure. All right, so yeah, now we'll move on to Voyager Story. So Voyager Story, again, is our backend component for crafting experiences. And you're going to need to go to the URL 3d.si.edu/Voyager-story-standalone. And John will drop that link into the chat as well. So a little bit of a backstory on this application. This is something that we've been using in-house for a couple of years now to craft the experiences you'll see on our site. But that has really been tied to our internal data systems so that when you used it and you click, a save button, your content is being saved directly to our hard drives and our infrastructure. And of course, that's not something that, can be publicly accessible. And we wanted to have something that would fit that criteria. So this is actually the first release of what we're calling Voyager Story Standalone. So this is a publicly accessible page where you can use Voyager Story. The main difference here, which you should keep in mind, and I will repeat several times through this part of the workshop, is that whenever you see a button that says save in the interface, what it's actually doing when you click that is it's saving the content you've created or the changes you've made to the memory of the web browser. So that means if you were to, leave the page or close your web browser, that would all be lost. With this version of the application, your scene will not be locked in until you download it to your own personal computer, and that will be done with the button labeled download, which we will definitely talk about. All right, so we're gonna get going on this step. Hopefully you've all made it to this page. I recommend you scroll down so you can get the application in full view. You can also, resize your window, whatever you're comfortable with. If you need a little bit of space for working with a file folder or anything, you can make it smaller, but we do recommend it being sort of as large as you can get it, just so you have a lot of working space. And so for the first step, well, actually, before we start the first step, I'm going to give you a little introduction to the interface. So up at the top here, we base most of our work in Voyager Story on a task workflow. So each of the buttons in this top menu here are going to be specific tasks in our workflow that we'll go through one by one. When you select a task, you'll see the details of it in the lower left-hand corner of the interface. That's what we'll call the task pane. In the upper left-hand corner, we have another set of tabs. We have the navigator, which is a node tree. It's a graph that's showing all the stuff that's in your current scene. We have a media tab. That'll be the extra content like images and HTML files that make up your articles. And then the collection tab, which we'll also get into. So to start out, hopefully everybody has downloaded the resources. If you haven't unzipped it yet, please unzip the zip file and have a folder ready. And now I'm going to switch my share to my whole desktop so you can see my folder as well. So I've got a folder here, the workshop resources. It's got 3 things in it. So the first thing we need to do is add models to our scene. We support currently a format called GLTF. Those files can end either in GLTF or GLB. That's just a binary version of that format. We like this format because it's designed specifically for showing models on the web. Some people call it like the JPEG of 3D. We do have plans to support other formats in the future, but right now we're stuck with GLB. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take the file that ends in thumb.glb. We're going to click on it. We're going to drag it over to our preview window. That's going to be that big blue window. And once you see that dotted blue outline, you know that you've successfully dragged it over. So we're going to drop it in. And when we drop it in, we'll get this pop-up import menu. So the first thing we need to do with the import menu is we need to assign a quality to this model. And so what quality is it's essentially saying, is this a thumbnail? Is this something that is intentionally scaled down? It's low resolution, or is it all the way up to, the highest resolution that we can show on the web? And really, currently, to be honest, the different options we have, the ones that really matter are thumbnail, high, and AR. So thumbnail is what's going to automatically load in immediately when the user starts your experience. And that's because it will load in quick. And so it will give them, immediate visual to look at. And that will be something for them to experiment with while the high resolution model or whatever other medium or low that you have streams in to replace it. And then AR, we have integrated WebXR support for AR in Voyager. So if you drop in an AR quality model, you'll also get to have an AR experience built in to what you host. So for this, since that model ended in thumb, we can assume that that is the thumb quality. So we'll click thumb. And then we need to assign this derivative to a model in our scene. And so currently, as this interface tells us, there are no models in our scene. So we need to create a new one. So we already have add new model created. We can set the name of this model. And the object we're going to be working with today is actually a flapper dress from our collection. So I'm going to call this model dress. And then I'll click import model. And now you'll see it has loaded a model into our scene. And if we click and drag our preview to rotate, you'll see that it looks kind of crazy. It's not in the center. It's kind of, awkwardly tilted. And a good point to make here is if you're working with data that came directly from a 3D scan, it's not, or actually it is likely that you'll get it in some sort of weird configuration. So often something we have to do is we have to fix the model and we have to reposition it. So that's something that we will do in our next task. So, but next what we want to do is we want to load in our high resolution. So we'll go back to our content folder, click on our the object or the file that ends in high.glb, and then do the same thing. Drag it till we see that blue dotted outline, drop it in, select our derivative quality, which this time will be high. And then this time the difference is we have a model in our scene. So we have one option to attach the model to, or to attach the derivative to, which is our dress. And that is what we want. But let's say we had, a model of a pair of shoes or something that we wanted to add to this scene. We would go back down to add new model. We would probably call it shoes, and then we would import our derivative to that model. But since this is just a different version of the dress, we want to select dress, then again, click import model, and it will load in our high resolution version of that model. All right, and then the last thing we're going to do in this step is we're going to go to that upper left-hand corner. We have that selection of tabs. We're going to click collection. And if you notice in our preview window, it says missing title in the upper left-hand corner. So that's the scene title that will show up when someone views your presentation. So we want to change that. So we'll go in to the collection tab where it says missing title, and I'm going to change that to flapper dress. And you'll see that immediately reflected in the preview pane. All right, I'll go back to Navigator. And now I'm going to stop one more time and see if we have any questions about importing models into your scene.
No questions so far, and I'm just trying to get folks some extra documentation from the Voyager website because people are interested in more training material and videos like this.
Absolutely, and we have some information on our site which we will definitely share links to now, and we will share them again at the end. But we do hope to create more videos and documentation and things like that in the near future. Since this is our first deployment of this public application, we haven't had a chance to get a ton of that together yet.
Right. And we have 3 questions actually. The first is, can you give us some idea of what low, medium, high mean?
Sure, absolutely. That really is going to depend on your institution. I can tell you what we define as low, medium, and high. So for us, we're really focused on the geometry quality. Like we want the geometry to have a specific level of quality. So for us, low, medium, and high, the triangle count or the polygon count of the models are actually all the same. We use 150K for our goal. It varies if you talk to different people for what is a good model resolution to use. For the web, it usually varies between 100 and 150 for a single model. You can certainly accommodate more than that, but it's all about maintaining a good user experience. and having it work across devices like mobile. But for us, so with low, medium, and high, what we're actually changing is the resolution of the texture map. And for that, we're looking at 4K texture maps for high, 2K for medium, and 1K for low. The difference here would be the thumbnail version. The thumbnail version is actually, from a geometry standpoint, crunched down for us. So that is, I believe, 50K most of the time, and has like a 512 by 512 texture map. So pretty low. But that, as I said, that can vary. You might get different numbers from different folks. But those are the standards that we currently use. And did we have more questions?
I think the rest of the questions will be answered with what you're about to cover.
Okay, great. All right, so now we will move on to the next. Right, yeah, we will move on to the next step, which is going to be pose. So for that, we are going to click the pose task button in that top menu. And so that will open up that task pane in the lower left. And so this is where we're going to adjust that model so that it is in the appropriate position in our scene. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to click zoom extents. So that's going to take the model in all three of these views, or all four of these views actually, and center it in our view. But then we want to take the actual model and center it in the scene. So for that, we'll click the center button. All right, now we've centered the model in the scene. You'll see that it's now right there on the origin. So the next thing we need to do is we need to straighten it out. And so to do that, we're going to use the rotate function. So I'm going to click the rotate button, and then I'm going to go to each of these planar views. We have left, front, and top, and I'm going to rotate it on each of those views until it looks straight. So I'm going to start with left. I'm going to click on the right-hand side of the view and drag to the left, and it's going to rotate the model. And I'm going to keep doing that until it looks like it is pretty much straight up and down. Then I'll go to my front view, and it's just a little tweak here, but I'm going to do the same thing to get it straight. And then lastly, I'll go to the top view and rotate that until I get it to where my front is front. All right, and we are good to go. And so now that we have an appropriately positioned model, we're going to move on to our next step, which is our QC. So to do the QC, we're actually going to skip a button here in this top panel, and we're going to click on derivatives. So derivatives will show us the derivatives that we just imported. So again, we did thumb and we did high. And for the QC step, what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom in, and we're going to take a good close look at the object. And what we're looking for is we're looking for issues in geometry or issues in the texture. And this is our high resolution model. We can pan around, zoom in, and it's actually looking pretty good. So we'll switch over to our thumb. We'll zoom in, and you can immediately see here, as I mentioned, the quality of this thumb texture map is quite different. We're going from 4K to 512. Excuse me. So you can see that it's quite degraded, but we don't really care in this case because it's a thumbnail. So it's not going to be on screen for that long. If I zoom in, you can see some things that might qualify. If this were a higher resolution model, you can see some of these artifacts here and the texture map. And that might be something where, if we saw that in something we actually intended to display as high quality, we'd want to get back with the content creator and say, hey, is there something you can do about addressing these issues with the texture map? All right, so now once we've evaluated everything and made sure it all looks good, the last thing we're going to do with this step is we're going to check the units of the model. And how we will do that is by using that measurement tool that we demoed earlier. So we're going to click this settings button. We're going to click the measurement tool, and then I'm going to click on one side of the dress. Oops, turn it on. Click on one side of the dress, click on the other, and you'll see the measurement it gave me was 2.45 millimeters. So it's pretty safe to assume that that is not the correct measurement, unless it's a teeny tiny dress. So what we need to do then is we need to go back to our pose task, and we need to fix that measurement, or that scale, excuse me. So I'm going to turn that off. We're going to go back to pose. And this is something where in your use, you may have to do some calculations or some guess and check to make sure you get the appropriate the scale. But for us, I happen to already know that what we want is meters. And if we look at our units, it's currently in centimeters. So if I change that to meters, we should be all good with our scale. And global units, as you'll see in a few moments, that's what's going to be displayed in that measurement tool. So if you wanted, if your object is in meters, but you wanted that measurement to be displayed in centimeters, this is where you would change that. All right, now I'm going to stop again and see if we have any questions with our pose or QC steps.
No questions.
Okay. All right. I'll just walk through one more time before I move on for anybody that may have missed it. For the pose, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to zoom extents to get everything into the middle. We're going to click center to center it. And then we're going to select the rotate tool and go to each of the views to rotate our object until it is oriented with the axes of the space. All right, so if we don't have any questions, we'll move on to the next step, which is capture. So now we're going to go to that second task button, capture, and click that. So what the capture task does is it captures the state of your scene. And that's useful for a couple of things. Number one, it's what your end user will see when they initially load your experience. So it's essentially the initial state of your scene. So you want to get the model in the exact view that you want your user to see it, and you want to have whatever content visible that you intend, for the user to see immediately when they load the model. And it also, at the same time, it takes a 2D capture of your scene. So it takes an image of the scene that you can then save to use for a thumbnail for the object, or for promotional materials, or whatever you might want to use the image for. So for this step, we want to get the view, whatever view we want, for this case I think is pretty close to what we had. I just want to have it zoomed in. I'm going to put it at a nice angle, and then I'm going to go over to my task tab, and I'm going to click that capture button. And now this locks in this state. So we've now saved this state to our browser. Once again, we have not saved it to our scene in a permanent way yet. So for that, we'd have to download our scene, but we've locked in this state. And I'll also mention, say, when we move on to other steps, you're rotating around, you're moving your model, and you get out of sorts, and you're like, hey, I want to go back and make sure my initial view still looks good. You can go back to the capture tab. You can click the restore button, and it'll put you right back in that state that you had previously saved. And so underneath of the capture and restore buttons, we have the thumbnail section. So you can see when we click that capture button, it also grabbed a thumbnail image. And then we have two options. We have save. And so again, if I click save, it's taking that thumbnail. It's actually making a thumb, a low, a medium, and a high resolution image. And it's saving all four of those images to our scene package that we will later download to our local computers. But if you just want to download this image that you have right here, we have a button here that will allow you to do that as well. All right, so that was a pretty quick one, but I'm going to pause one more time just to make sure that capture step made sense to everyone.
Yep, no questions for the capture step.
Okay, great. All right, so we will move on now to the next section, which is going to be adding content to our scene. So we've got our dress positioned nicely. We've got the title, we've captured our state and our images. So now we want to actually add some content. So the first thing that we'll do is we will add some annotations. So we're going to click that annotation task button again. But this time we need to select our object. So we're going to click dress in that node graph there. And then you'll see it open up the task panel at the bottom. We're going to click the create button. And for our first annotation, we're going to put one on the shoulder strap of the dress. So what we need to do is we can orient the model so that we can see that shoulder strap a little bit better. And then we just need to click once on the model. And you'll see that that put an annotation pointing directly to the spot that I clicked on that model. So if I rotate around, you'll see we have a lead line pointing directly to that location. All right, and it says new annotation, which of course is not what we want. So if we go back over to our task panel and scroll down, we'll see an item called title, where it says new annotation, and we can change that to something imaginative like shoulder strap. All right, and now you'll see in our preview window that it is titled shoulder strap. And we have several different types of annotations. This is our basic or standard type of annotation, which is just sort of a title bar and a leader that points to the object. We can change that. We'll go to the style option, and you'll see we have standard, circle, and extended. We'll pick extended. So extended, as we showed in the saxophone demo earlier, that gives you that extra box underneath the title where you can add content. So to do that, we will scroll all the way down to the bottom of this task window where it says lead, and we can type our extra information in there. So I will say, this is the shoulder strap of the flapper dress. As you can tell, I'm not a content matter expert. All right, so now we have our annotation with our extra content. So you see, if we close that annotation, we get our title bar. If we click it, it opens up and we get our extra content. So that's how our end user will experience that annotation. All right, so now let's add a second annotation. So we've already got create selected. So now let's move down to the hem of the dress. So I'm going to click at a point down here on the hem. Again, I'm going to go down and change the title to hem. And then this time, I'm going to go back up to the style of the annotation, and I'm going to change it to circle. And now you'll see you get instead of a lead line from the box to the object, you get a circle. And if we go down to the field that's called marker, you can put something in that field. I'm going to put the number 2. And now you see we've got a 2 in our circle. So that's if you wanted to have numbered annotations on an object, that's exactly how you would do it. Normally, of course, we wouldn't have different style annotations on the same object. But this is, just for the purposes of demoing how these different ones work. And again, we can go all the way down to the bottom and we can say, this is the hem. All right, so now we've got our content. If you go back to our preview, we can look at our shoulder strap content, or we can click on our 2 and see our hem content. All right, so now let's say we're taking a closer look at this object and we're like, all right, I like my annotation, but it really feels like it would fit better if it was on the other shoulder strap of the dress. Well, we can pretty easily address that. So I'm going to zoom back in. I'm going to go back over to my task panel, and this time I'm going to select move. And now all I need to do, similar to creating an annotation, go back to my object, go to the spot where I want that annotation to move, and just give it a single, or actually, sorry, I skipped a point. We want to select the annotation that we want to move, which is our shoulder strap one, and then just give it a single click on the point where we want it to go, and it has moved that annotation from one side to the other. All right, now I'm going to pause again after annotations and see if we have any questions there.
We have one question. Can you add audio to annotations?
That's a great question. We currently do not have the ability to add audio into annotations. You could add a link to an audio file, but we do have audio support within Voyager. We have support for essentially like an audio narration. So it gives you another button in the interface that you can click and have someone tell you, a story about the object. If you wanted it specific to an annotation right now, it would need to be it would really need to be a link. We could support that. If that's something that you're interested in, please do reach out to us. We do theoretically have the capability to put anything that you can put on a web page in one of these annotations. So you could put an image or a video. They wouldn't, videos don't work real well in this small size. But an audio component that gives you a little play button or something certainly might. So we could definitely explore that. So long, small question answered in a long way. We do not currently have that functionality, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't. And that's one of the great things about this being open source and being something that we, maintain in-house, is that if that's a driver for a project that you have, especially if you work at the Smithsonian, please do contact us and let us know, and we can look at integrating that functionality.
And just the question, and just confirming that multi-language support will also work with annotation. So it works with all text in Voyager.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. That's a feature that we don't have time to go through in depth today, but we definitely want to mention that any of the text content that's in the Voyager interface, that includes not just the content you add, like annotations or articles, but also the UI, the title of the scene, that all has multilingual support. So in the interface for each of those objects, like for instance, this annotation that we currently have selected, you'll see a field that's called language. And so if we change that language to something else and then fill in a title and a lead or whatever we want, then that will give you a button on screen to change language, and also will support swapping back and forth between different languages for your content. So yes, that's definitely supported for essentially everything in the experience.
Great. And there's a few more questions, but I'm going to hold them till the end just to make sure we get through the demo. But they're great questions, so hopefully we'll have time.
Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to move on to our to articles. So we'll click the next tab, which is articles. And to start out, we're just going to click create. And so you'll see it creates a new article. We have a title of, shockingly new article that's seen in the field here, as well as in the article editor pane, which is going to be on the lower section on the right-hand side. I'll make a note here. All of the windows or the panes in the window for Voyager are adjustable. So in this case, we're going to be working on an article. So I'm going to take this article pane and actually make it larger, so I have a little more room to work on the article. So first, what we'll do is we will change these titles. So I'm going to change this to flapper dress. And this title in the task pane is what will show up in that menu of articles. And then over here in the editor, this is what will actually show up in the article. So I'm going to change that as well. And then one important thing about, yeah, so we're all good with that. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create some additional content, which again, I don't really know that much about this dress. So I'm going to put 1920s flapper dress. All right. And so the last thing we're going to show as far as creating an article is adding an image to it. So for this purpose, we'll again go back to our resources, and the last file in there that we haven't used, it's the JPEG. We're going to take that and we're going to again drag it over to our preview window till we see that dotted blue outline. We're going to drop it in there, and this time we don't see anything update in the window immediately, but what that's done is it's taken that resource and dropped it into our media collection. So if we click on that media tab, we'll now see that we have that JPEG in there as an option. So now if we want to add that to our article, we'll click on it, and then we'll drag it over to our article and drop it in. And now you'll see we have a nice open access image of our flapper dress. And you'll also see that it's quite large. So if we click on it, we'll get some scale boxes in the corners, and we can click those and we can drag it down. Also looks like it is not on a new line. I want it to be a new line, so I can adjust that. And one important point I want to make here, when making these experiences, we really want to optimize them for our end users. So we don't want to put really high resolution resources that aren't going to be seen at that resolution. So really what I would want to do, if I were making this for production, instead of taking that really big image and scaling it down in Voyager, I would want to do that outside of Voyager and save a smaller resolution copy and then drop that copy in here. Because even though you've scaled that file down to a small size, it's still taking up the memory that that large image takes when the user is loading it. So it still makes it resource intensive, even though you've scaled it way down. So we do want to keep the images to a manageable size. And lastly, we've got our article done as far as we want it. So we will again click that save button, which takes that article and saves it to our scene package. And if we want, I can adjust these windows back again, and I can go and look. Now I've got a button for articles. And since I only have one article, it opens it directly to that article. But I can go back to the menu, and we can see I have that one article created. All right, so that is how we do articles. Any questions on that?
Is there a way to edit the HTML source of the article?
Yeah, absolutely. Once we save our scene package, the articles will all be saved as individual HTML files. So there's nothing at all stopping you from going into that package of files once you downloaded it and editing that HTML yourself. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing that.
And just there's a question: is this standalone editor open source? And yes, this is open source, and all of Voyager is open source.
Yep, everything we do is open source. If you're a developer, we welcome you to come by the repository. I think John will post a link in the chat. We welcome pull requests, we welcome collaborations, so please do. And if you decide to use it, even as is, please let us know. We're always happy to hear about folks getting involved. But I do want to mention also that with the debut of this standalone story version, you can actually use the pipeline. So you can use the back end and the front end of Voyager without having to know anything about coding, without having to download or install any software on your computer. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible.
And just to quickly expand on that, is this is, you can get to Voyager Story on the website, like as you are now, but then also Voyager itself, we host it, like Smithsonian hosts it, so you don't have to install Voyager, you just have to call it and then point it at these files. So just, yeah, there's nothing you need to install or download or have like a system administrator to do.
Yep. And at the end of the workshop, if we have time, which I think we will, I'll briefly walk through how you can do that. So how you can take your own content and host it all yourself without having to rely on the Smithsonian. All right, so now we'll move on to the last content step, which is creating tours. So for this, we're going to click on, of course, that next button, which is the tour task. So our preview window tells us no tours available, which is good because we don't have any yet. So now we'll go down to our tours tab, and we will click that plus button to create a tour. And then we're going to go down to the set of tabs where we were previously editing the article, and we're going to click on the next tab over, which says Tour Editor. And so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to configure our tour. So our tour system can save pretty much every aspect of what you can do in Voyager to a tour step, but that's a lot of stuff. And if we were to save all of that stuff every time we made a tour, it would make a really bloated file and it would be a degraded experience for our end users. So what we do is we select the things that we know we're going to want in each of our specific tours. And so in this case, I'm going to go back in case anybody missed that. There's a button, we call it the hamburger button sometimes. It's got these 3 horizontal lines all the way to the right. We're going to click on that. It's going to open up those settings. And so right now we have selected reader and navigation. So reader is good. We want that. So that's for the article reader. So if we open an article during a tour, that will get saved. Navigation is going to save our camera view. So that's definitely something we want because we want our camera to move around as we go through the steps of the tour. And then the last thing we want is we want annotations to be reflected. If we open or if we close an annotation, we want that to be saved as part of the tour. So for that, we actually have to click the option called Viewer. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to click OK. And now we're going to go in, and as usual, we have kind of the default title. So we will change that title to Dress Tour. And you'll see that updated in the navigator part of the preview window here. And now we have to make some tour steps. So we will start by getting a nice full view of our model. So our tour editor is essentially what you see is what you get based on the preview window. So I'm going to zoom out and orient my model so it's a nice full view. Then I'm going to click Create, and I'm going to create a tour step from that view. I'm going to go over to the step information, and I'm going to change the title of that step to Full View. Right, and you'll see that that's now updated in the interface as well. And now I'm going to make a second step. So I'm going to click Create again. And now for this step, I want to highlight that annotation that we made on the shoulder strap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on annotations, make sure that one's open, and then I'm going to reorient my model. So I'm going to pan it down, to zoom in a little bit more so that we get a nice view of that shoulder strap and that annotation. And now, so anytime we make a change to a step, all we need to do is go back down to this tour editor, make sure we have that step highlighted, and then click the button Update. And so Update takes those changes and locks them into that step. So now we'll see if we go back to our first step, we've got our first full view with no annotations. Then we can go back forward to our second step, and we've got our shoulder strap view with our annotation. So as I said previously, it's just what you see is what you get. So we will go with a third step. And so this will be our hem. So we'll again reorient, we'll open that hem annotation, zoom in a little bit. And again, as before, we will go back and we will click Update to lock that in. Oh, and I just noticed I never set the title for my second step. So I can go back, I can select that step, go to my title, I can call it Shoulder View, and then we'll go to our third step, and we'll change that title to Hem View. All right, and now we will make one more last step. So I'm going to create a fourth step, and now I'm going to turn off the annotations. We're going to zoom out, go back to our sort of full dress view, and now I'm going to turn on our article so someone could read our expansive text about this flapper dress. And then, of course, again, go down, click Update to lock in that step. And we will give a title to this step, Article View. All right, and so now if let's just go all the way out of tours. And if we go back to our tours, we can try it out. If we start it up, we start at our first step, go to our second shoulder strap step, down to our hem, and then zoom out and open up our article. So there you can see we have our article, or we have our tour set up exactly how we wanted it. So that preview pane is just how your end user will see it. So I'm going to leave out of there. And then just to show you, say you decided later on, like, oh wait, I think that shoulder view wasn't quite what I wanted. All right, well, all we need to do again, say we were on articles, we want to go back to tours, make sure tours are on, go back to that step so we can go to shoulder view. Let's say, I don't know, we want it more from the side. All we do is move our view. Again, make sure that step is selected, click that Update. And now when we go back to step 1 to step 2, you see we have our updated view. So it's as easy as that. All right, we'll exit out of tours. All right, and so now the moment that we've been waiting for, now we've got our scene, we've set it all up the way we want, we've added all our content. So the last thing we need to do, as I've said multiple times, is we need to make sure all these things are actually locked in for good. So we need to save this content to our desktops. So to do that, we're going to go to the download button in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to click that, and it'll open up a download window. And we're just going to save that. All right. And now I'm going to show you, once you've created a scene and you have one of those scene packages, I'm actually going to refresh this window and blow away everything that we just did. So I'm refreshing the window. Now I'm going to go to my downloads, open up a new Explorer, go to my downloads. And here's my zip file, my scene package that I just created. I'm going to drag that whole zip. I don't need to unzip it. Just take the zip file, drag it over to my preview window till I get that blue outline, drop it in, and now you'll see that it's loaded in everything that we just did. So if we wanted to go back way after the fact and make a change, it's really easy to just drag and drop the entire scene. I can go to the tours. You'll see our dress tour is there. Our article, if I select our dress, our article is there. It's everything exactly how we set it up. All right, so I'm going to stop there and see if we have any other questions about this last tour stage.
Oh, we've got a question kind of going back to articles, asking, can articles include iframes?
Yes, articles can include iframes.
That covers it for now.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm actually going to change my share to go back to the window, give you a little more screen space. All right, so the last thing we're going to demo here is how to take like your own experience, like the one we just created today, and embed that into a web page. So to do that, we're actually going to go back to Glitch. And unfortunately, this is something that, as far as Glitch goes, takes a little more setup to do. So we sort of have the, cooking show pre-canned or pre-cooked result to show you. But I'll tell you the main thing that takes time with Glitch, unfortunately, is taking folders of files and hosting them. Seems like an easy thing, but isn't straightforward with Glitch. So if you do have, a way like say a Google Drive or, some other place where you can host that folder of files that you downloaded, it'll be much more straightforward to do. But once you have those online somewhere, and you definitely need to unzip that folder before you put it online to display. It won't be able to read the files directly from the zip. But once you have that, what you're going to do is you're going to go to our documentation website. There's a specific page called How to Embed a Model on Your Site, which John will drop the link to in the chat. And the first option for how to embed on this page is what we've already talked about at the beginning of the workshop, and that's for embedding Smithsonian content. You just get that embed code, copy it, paste it right in. But to do your own content, it's not too much harder. It's a little bit more involved, but not too much harder. So if you scroll down to option 2, essentially you need to add currently 4 lines of code to your web page. We have these 2 lines that start with link. And those go into the header section or the head section of your web page. And then we have 2 in the body. And I can explain these real briefly. This first link, this is just essentially a shortcut icon for Voyager. What will show up, in your browser in the corner when you're on that page. You don't have to have it, but we recommend it. And the second one is the fonts that we use in Voyager. So again, if you don't have that file, it will still work, but some of the formatting might be a little wonky because it's not using the same font that we recommend. But in the body is the main meat of what you really need to host Voyager or to display Voyager yourself. And so those lines are the Voyager component and the script that has all of the code for Voyager. So what we're going to do now is we're going to copy this entire thing. So the code here in our example is actually a fully functioning web page in and of itself. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back to my glitch page. And once again, you can see we have, our hello world page that Glitch has created. We'll go back to that index.html, which is that same page that we saw in that first demo. But this time, just to make it a little easier, instead of pasting in those 2 lines, I'm actually just going to replace the entire thing. So I'm going to highlight all this code and I'm going to paste right on top of it. And now it reloads my preview, and you see that it reloaded the content from that demo. So that demo is our mammoth from our documentation webpage. But we want this to be our own content. So the last step that we need to take to make this work for our own content is we have to point the component to the content and give it the name of our document. And to make this a little easier, I'm actually going to close this preview pane so we can see all the code. And so here, since we have our content, you can see a folder called flapper dress here that I've preloaded. So that's local to our web page. So what you need to do is you need to change the root and the document attributes of our Voyager component. So first we'll change the root, and this is going to be the location of that content. So here it's that flapper dress folder. And since that's local to the web page, I can make it a local link. But for you, it might be a Google link to your Google Drive. It might be, a fully qualified domain name or URL. But here, all we need is flapper dress to give it our relative folder path. And then secondly, for the document, if we open up our dress folder, or if you unzip that scene package that you downloaded, you'll see that the scene file is this one that's called scene.svx.json. So we want to go back to the document. Instead of being called document.json, we want to call it, scene.svx.json. All right, now we've made our 2 changes to the root and document. And now I'm going to open that preview pane back up. And now you'll see that it's loaded up our content. So this is again, one that I pre-made, so it might be slightly different, but it's got an article, it's got a tour, it's got our annotations for the shoulder strap, and the hem. So that's how you can display your own content. So all you need to do is use Voyager Story to craft your scene, have it online somewhere, paste in these lines of code. You don't need to replace, it doesn't have to be this web page itself. You can have your own web page with additional content and just have these 4 lines pasted in, and then make those adjustments to the root and the document attribute, and you'll be able to display your own scene. And before I stop with the content, I just wanted to mention a couple other features of Voyager that we don't have time to get into really today. But if you're interested, feel free to contact us. I think I mentioned this briefly, but we have integrated AR support. So if you go to many of our object pages on your mobile device, you'll actually see another button at the top of the menu on the left-hand side of the Voyager component that says AR. And you can tap that and get an AR experience directly from your phone. And that's something that by using Voyager Story, again, if you drop in an AR model, you will get that support as well. And we also have an API. So if you're an advanced user and you're more of a web developer, we have several different API functions that allow you to customize and interact with this component from the surrounding web page. So there's a lot of documentation on our GitHub site. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And now I will stop and see if we have any follow-up questions on the workshop.
We have a question. Did you just drop the whole scene folder we downloaded into glitch files?
Yeah, so that's the issue. That's why I had to do sort of like a canned version of this presentation. Glitch doesn't allow you to drop folders directly into their system, which I don't entirely understand. So no, this is actually a canned thing where beforehand I used the command line to copy the files over. Which if you're comfortable with the command line, just Google import folder to glitch, and it'll give you some pretty quick steps on how to do that. But again, if you want to do this for yourself with your own project, you don't need to use glitch, and certainly don't need to host your files there. You could use Google Drive. You could use anything that is accessible online.
And follow-up question on that is, how did you make the folder in glitch? Was it make directory in the command line?
If you take a zip file and drag and drop it into glitch, it'll actually put it into the assets folder. So you can see here I have an asset called Voyager-scene .zip, and then I used unzip to unzip the file and direct them to a new folder in the hierarchy, in the storage hierarchy, and then removed the zip file from that side. And like I said, there's I don't have the link handy, but if you Google import, zip files or folders into glitch, it'll be probably the first result you'll get.
Great. I've got some questions that aren't necessarily related to glitch, but just have come up over the course of the presentation. So the first one is, can an object be opened? And this, I think this might relate to like object animation or reposing objects in Voyager.
Sure, yeah. Currently, that kind of depends. We don't currently have support for canned animation. So something where if you use, a 3D software package like Blender or something and created an animation of your object, we don't have support to play that back. That is on our list. That is something that we want to add. It hasn't been a priority for us just because we don't have animated objects in our collection at this point. But it is on our radar and something we want to do. But currently, there's a caveat to that. If you do have an object, like say you have a pot with a lid, and you want to animate, you want to have a tour where, like on a certain tour step, the lid comes off the pot and you can see inside of it. If those are two separate objects in the scene, you can accomplish that through, if I go back to our tours, those settings for the tour that we talked about, there's one that's called models. So if you were to turn on models, that means anything that you do with a model, that you change during that tour step will be reflected when you go through the tour. So what you could do is turn on that model option, and then when you're making your tour on a certain step, you could move and rotate the lid, and then it would interpolate from the position on the first step to that open position on the second step. So it's sort of a roundabout way to accomplish that. So it technically is possible with multiple pieces, but otherwise, no, we don't support canned animation, but we plan to in the near future.
Great. We've got another one. I think this relates to downloading the 3D files that are in a Voyager scene. So we've got, if the files are in Google Drive, does that make the model downloadable to the user? So I guess if you're hosting your files that Voyager is referencing.
Technically, yes, it does. The user would have to be a pretty advanced user. If they went to the network tab of their browser where it shows you everything you're requesting over the network, they would see the URLs for the specific files that you were requesting. That's something that if you're a server maintainer, or you're someone on sort of the network end of it, it's my understanding that that's something that can be locked down. That's not something that Voyager can control. In general, when working with 3D models, if the data is streaming to a browser, everything that happens in a browser is on the user's end. So if you're sending data through a browser to a user, they've got it on their end. So if they're really technically savvy, they can get it. There's really nothing you can do. But there are ways to make it much more difficult. And the way that we just showed, it's not easy for someone to do that, but it is definitely possible if they're a technical person and know what they're doing. But locking that down would be something that would have to happen on the sort of server side of it. Like an admin would have to set it up so a request for that model only works if it comes from a very specific place. And that's something that I imagine is pretty hard to do with Google Drive. So yeah, I would say on Google Drive, technically, yes, someone could download that. But if you have control over the server, there are sort of advanced things you can do. But in general, if you're going to work with 3D and make it available online, you sort of have to bite the bullet and know that it's entirely possible that someone could, get your model or your geometry. It happens to commercial game developers and everybody who deals with 3D content.
Thanks. All right, so the next question is around the Smithsonian branding on Voyager. So will your final downloaded model have that Smithsonian logo embedded? And also, we have the two places of branding are the loading screen with the Sunburst spinning, and then of course the Smithsonian logo in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, sure. So as far as the Smithsonian logo in the upper right-hand corner, right now, if you were to use this and put this on your site and you didn't want that there, we have configuration options to remove that. So in that, we go back to my glitch page. So in this Voyager Explorer component where we had two attributes called root and document, we have another attribute called UI mode, and you can find documentation on that on our GitHub site. And so that's another attribute that you can fill out, and you can essentially tell it, I don't want the logo to be displayed, and it'll show up without the logo. Essentially, all the UI elements you can independently say if you want them to be shown or not. As far as the Sunburst goes, right now, no, because we kind of need a way to tell the user that something's happening. So we can't just like get rid of that. But if you wanted to replace either the logo in the right-hand corner or the Sunburst with some other kind of loading icon, that's the beauty of this being open source, is that you can do whatever you want with it. So you can replace it with whatever. As far as us providing like an attribute in the component for doing that, we have not done that yet. That's certainly something that we could do. If you're really interested in that, I would recommend you go to GitHub and file an issue saying, can we get an attribute to be able to change the icon and the logo in the right hand corner. That kind of drives like priorities for us as far as what we change and what we add. But yeah, there definitely are ways right now to like get rid of it. And if you are a developer or have access to a developer, it's pretty straightforward to replace it with your own logo.
The next question is, are there any institutions outside of SI using Voyager to display their 3D models?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Library of Congress has used it. We've had, there was a university, I want to say Alabama. I don't remember, John, if you do, that was using it at one point. We have actually multiple groups in the Netherlands that are currently using it for grant-funded projects, for projects revolving around like archaeology and things like that. They're actually exploring expanding the functionality of Voyager to support real-time collaboration of like adding annotations and things like that. So yeah, there definitely are other groups using it, but we'd love to have more. So if you think it might work for your group or your institution and you have any questions or concerns, please do reach out and we're happy to talk about it.
Great. This is a little bit adjacent, but we've got a question about, is Cook available for Linux? The documentation says it's only for Windows.
I mean, technically, yes, because technically Cook is a Node server. So Node can run on Linux just as well as it can, well, actually better probably than it runs on Windows. But right now, most of the software that we use to process files, so just for anyone that's not familiar, Cook is another project that we have, which is a framework for automating the processing of 3D data into these 3D models. What it does is it orchestrates all sorts of different applications that we use for different parts of our pipeline to get from data to model. Most of the applications that we use are Windows applications, some of them Windows only applications. So yeah, for us, it's not an option. If your whole pipeline is supported on Linux, yeah, absolutely, you certainly can do that. And really, the instructions for deploying it are not any different than what are on the GitHub site, because it's built in Node. So yeah, you can just essentially follow the same directions. And if you have any issues, just let us know on GitHub.
Right. And we've got a question. Is it possible to change the texture of a model in Voyager? To show an infrared image or UV light image?
Yes, absolutely. Well, yes and no. That is something that a feature that we've recently implemented and probably will be releasing this week. So currently, if you were to grab the code from Voyager, you would not be able to do that. But we are releasing that functionality soon. It comes in the form of what we're calling an overlay. So an overlay, if you can imagine like an archaeological site, and you want to show that model as is with the texture map, but then you also want to point out like, different important regions on the, on the site, like you want to color in the bones. You could have an overlay map that then is shown on top of the original texture map. But in this case, if you actually want to replace that texture map with a new one, all you need to do is make sure that that overlay map is not transparent, that it's a fully opaque map. And that's exactly what will happen. It will change from whatever the first map was to whatever the next map was. And that's also it is configurable via a tour. So you could have like an initial tour stop that shows your initial texture map, and then it could change to your infrared or whatever it is on the second tour stop.
Awesome. And just to check, because I might have given bad information in the chat, so that there'll be a UI supporting that in the next week or two?
Yep.
Well,
yep.
Okay. Cool, Jamie. Very cool. All right, so let's see. There's a question in the material changing in the 3D viewer. Oh, right. Okay, so the materials we have at the bottom, we have the X-ray and clay and other materials. Can you define those in Voyager Story?
No, not currently. Those are things that we chose because we had specific advantages that we thought those would give you. If you have ideas for material changes that you think would be helpful from a educational context, like that would help people to understand the model better, definitely let us know, because we're always open to improving. And that is one of the areas where, to be honest, when we have talked to like educators, several of those options, they're like, what's the value of this for my students? So if you have any ideas about that, please do let us know. But right now, if you wanted to change those options, that would be something where you would need to be a developer or have a developer to go in and make modifications.
That looks like it covers it for questions. I'm going to drop a link to the Voyager issues page on GitHub. So we've shared a lot of kind of the documentation, but the GitHub page is if you want to dig into the weeds, or if you want to propose any changes to Voyager, this is the place to do it. And just to kind of reiterate, going to this GitHub page, you don't have to be fluent in HTML or any sort of coding to use Voyager, but it's open source, so you can dive in as deep as you want.
Absolutely, and thank you everybody for joining. Let me go back to those slides. My email address is here. If anybody wants to contact me, it's copeg, C-O-P-E-G, at si.edu. And we really appreciate you coming to the workshop today.
Yep, thank you so much. And yeah, my email there too. And if if you have any questions kind of on managing this data and kind of the managing reality capture and 3D models, that's kind of my wheelhouse. So you can shoot me a message there, but yeah, it's kind of an aside to this. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.